Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the May 21st, 2025 regular meeting of the Board of Selectmen. I'm First Selectman Colin Mall, and I call this meeting to order. If everyone would please stand and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Open up the floor to public comment. Start in the room. Is there any public comment in the room? Yep. Okay. Is there any public comment on Zoom? I don't have my glasses, so I can't see who that is.
Just Tess and Tom Frenay are on, and no one's raising their hand.
Hands, okay. Moving on to item 3, discussion and approval of the minutes from the May 6th, 2025 special meeting of the Board of Selectmen.
So this is Kathy Harrington. I move that they be adopted with just one change on page 1 where it says the first selectman called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. If it would continue and say that, and he asked everyone to join him in the Pledge of Allegiance. That's it.
All right, the motion has been made. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Item number 4 is discussion of Neighborhood Assistance Act Tax Credit Program. You guys received a memo from Director of Planning and Development, Bill Hawkins. He's here with us tonight, so I won't go over it. I'll have Bill go over it.
Sure. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. For the record, Bill Hawkins, Director of Planning and Development. So the Neighborhood Assistance Act program is offered by the Department of Revenue Services. They do it annually. The town actually took part in this a few years ago when we were going to purchase the street lights. But nonetheless, so it provides a tax credit to business firms that make cash investments in qualifying programs. And we're here tonight with the Phelps Hathaway House or the Antiquarian Landmark Society. Lynn Mervosh is with us. She's the site administrator, and if there are any questions that I can't answer, she could do that. So they have a project and an application which I attached to my memo for you to review. It's a fairly minor project as far as this program goes, but it would do some plumbing upgrades to their steam radiator heating system, and in addition to correcting some issues, it would also be an energy efficiency project because it would help with oil consumption. So it is an eligible project under the guidelines of the program. And energy efficiency projects are a 100% credit, so it's a 1-to-1. A lot of companies prefer that over the other kinds of programs, so I don't think they'll have any problem raising the $2,800, selling the tax credits that they're looking for through this program. So really that's the reason the town's involved is because the municipality has to approve the program. And we have to have a public hearing, which we noticed. There's no other financial impact to the town other than the cost of the hearing notice, which we put in the paper last Wednesday, advertising the public hearing. And after that, I have a suggested motion, should you be so inclined to approve. And that's about it. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Anyone have any questions for Bill?
Just good luck finding the guy who can work on steam.
Oh, we have one. Oh, good.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
So this is Kathy Harrington. I'll move that the Board of Selectmen approve.
We gotta actually do the public hearing.
We
Yeah.
do?
This was
So thank you for that.
information. and
So
then
just
we'll-
hold on to that one. Yeah. All right, thanks, Bill.
Sure.
All right,
Go ahead.
item number 5 is open public hearing for 2025 Neighborhood Assistance Act Tax Credit Program. So, is there any public comment in the room or on Zoom? Do I see a hand? Yep. I can't actually see.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Tom, can you hear us?
Yes, you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi, Tom Frenay, 489 Warnertown Road. I'd like to support the project that's being proposed. I think this is a great thing for, I think you said 2 different organizations to apply for, and the town should support it. I appreciate it very much. And I'd also like to say when you have a public hearing, it would be very helpful if the agenda would actually include a little information about what the hell you're talking about. Because all I see on the agenda is the name of the act that the state created a couple of years ago or a year ago, whatever it is. I had to go look on the state website to figure out what it was all about, and I had no clue what organizations had applied for it. So just for the members of the public that might be interested, in addition to myself, I think it would be useful if you would include some more information with the agenda. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other comment? All right, seeing none, I will close the public hearing for the 2025 Neighborhood Assistance Act Tax Credit Program. Move to item 7, discussion and approval of Neighborhood Assistance Act Tax Credit Program.
Now I would like to make a motion that we approve the Phelps Hathaway House Energy Efficiency Project for inclusion in the 2025 Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credit Program.
All right, the motion has been made. Is there any discussion? Lynn, I just want to say you guys do a great job over there. And
Yep.
we've worked with you in the past, especially with the ARPA Historical Grant money, so thank you for everything you did.
Thank you so much.
All right, hearing no other discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Lynn. All right, item number 8 is updates on the affordable housing recommendations. I'm going to turn this back over to Bill to review the memo that he sent us.
All right, thank you, Colin. Good evening once again. For the record, Bill Hawkins, Director of Planning and Development. So the memo I sent is rather lengthy. I'll sort of summarize as I walk through it, but if you have questions that come to you as I'm talking, please feel free to interrupt me. But this really all stems from a discussion, I think a couple discussions that I probably had with the Board of Selectmen. Last one was in December, where we were discussing, or the board was discussing, the recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee to you as the Board of Selectmen. And we sort of discussed funding sources for affordable housing. What are the funding sources? Where do they come from? How can affordable housing get built? What's the process for that? So my takeaways were a couple things. First, to look at the funding sources, report back, but also there are recommendations in there for the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Board of Selectmen asked me to present those to the board, so I'll discuss that a little bit as well. And then keeping in mind sort of town properties that might work for development if the town were interested in developing those properties for housing. And with a focus on elderly housing, disabled housing, similar to the Housing Authority. So those were sort of my takeaways. This memo is meant to sort of summarize that. And in doing that, I did some research on my own, and then I also had a couple of meetings. I met with Mike Santoro of the Department of Housing. Mike is an excellent resource and very responsive whenever I reach out to him. And he knows all things funding when it comes to housing and the state and what they can do and can't do. I also met with a developer, Corvus Capital, a private development firm that has built affordable housing. And not only have they built affordable housing, but they've worked with the town of Naugatuck and developed a property that the town had for affordable housing. So they had some valuable insight, which I touch on in the memo as well. And then because we were talking about the Housing Authority, I had a conversation with the Executive Director of our Housing Authority, Jason Joyce. So in terms of funding, there's really 2 primary programs that the state offers. They're called the Flex Program and the Home Program. And the Flex Program is also known as the Connecticut Affordable Housing Program. It's the state's primary bonding source for funding projects. These funds are largely used to fill a gap in funding, and you're going to hear that from me a couple of times. A lot of these programs are more for gap funding, but the Flex Program doesn't have to be used for that. It can provide a subsidy, up to 100 to up to 150,000 per unit for construction or financing. These funds look to fund projects that are 100% area median income, but focus, and the emphasis is more on 50% area median income. So, lower affordability levels. It can fully fund a municipal developer, though, as well. If the town were to say, well, we have a property, the town's going to develop that ourselves, this funding source could potentially fund that project. So that was an interesting point. It can also fund housing authorities if they wanted to develop a property and build more units. So Funding is obtained through state bonding. When I talked to Mike Santoro, he's like, that's really the main source for housing authorities and municipalities. Sort of similarly, there's the Home Investment Partnerships Program. That's federally funded, but it's funneled through the state and they administer it. And that's designed for low and moderate income households, provides funding for 80% AMI projects, but again, the focus is on lower affordability at 50%. There's a federal program similar, and they focus on lower AMI at 30%. And these are grants or loans to eligible applicants, which include municipalities and nonprofit organizations, for-profit developers. And that program is subject to an annual appropriation at the federal level. So I'm not sure where that stands with the current administration and if that's something that they're funding. But that's the interesting part of that one. There's other funding sources that can help. The community development block grants can't be used for new construction, but this has been the primary source of funding that we've used for the housing authority for rehabilitation of their property. And I was looking back, and since 2014, they've got over $3 million from that funding source to do work on their units and the property itself. It can also be used for housing rehab projects. The town of Southfield actually used to run their own housing rehab program back in the 90s. And then in the 2000s, we started working with a couple of other towns as a joint effort. We currently do not do it, but community development block grants can be used for housing rehab projects. There's a Build for CT program that also provides gap funding, but it's meant for more shovel-ready projects. The interesting thing with that is it can fund projects that aren't entirely affordable. So it can be a mix. It could be 80% market rate and 20% affordable. But the key with that is they're looking for shovel-ready, things that are ready to go. This is just one piece of the financing that might be needed to put shovels in the ground. That's offered through the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, or CHAFA, and I'll touch on them again in a second. There's a housing trust fund that's administered by the State Department of Housing. That's funded through general obligation bonds. Again, designed to create affordable housing for low and moderate income, focuses on 80% AMI, but can fund projects up to 120% AMI. So a little bit higher levels of affordability. It's a grant or a loan. Municipalities, housing authorities, nonprofit, and for-profit developers are eligible entities for that funding source. And then CHAFA, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. This is more for developers, but it's a quasi-public organization, and they work with public and private investors to help build affordable housing in the state. And they do that primarily through their two low-income housing tax credit programs, or LIHTC. There's a couple of different ones. There's the 9% LIHTC, and there's a 4% LIHTC. It's with tax-exempt bonding. It provides a subsidy to either acquire buildings, rehabilitate buildings, and then the 9% LIHTC tax credit is usually for larger new construction projects or substantial rehabilitation projects. And developers that build this stuff and know how to do it, the 9% LIHTC tax credit is almost essential for what they do in the state. It's extremely competitive. Connecticut's credit ceiling is limited to $10 million annually. And just for context, the affordable housing on East Street, the Brook Hill Village, that was approved a couple of years before it actually got built because the developer kept applying for this LIHTC tax credit funding. That was sort of the last piece they needed. The overall sort of takeaway from financing, if it wasn't obvious, financing affordable housing projects is extremely complex. When I met with Corvus Capital, they had the project in Naugatuck. They said, I call it lasagna financing because there's so many layers. They said, I think it was 9 different funding sources in their finance stack for that project. It includes equity, grants, whatever they were doing. It's incredible. So, but CHAFA with the LIHTC tax credits, that's an extremely valuable source of funding for these projects. And then the Connecticut Municipal Development Authority, or CMDA, they also have some funding. This actually was created by statutes in 2019, but it was only recently formed last year. They appointed an executive director, a gentleman named David Porras, and they have about $60 million, I think, that was allocated in funding. And so this is sort of the state's way of getting involved in trying to get new housing started. And it's focused on transit-oriented development, but it also applies to downtown areas and how they define that. And Mr. Corris, I was at a transportation committee meeting and he was presenting to the group. And he says he feels just about every municipality would qualify if they wanted to. So the process is you have to actually opt in. The legislative body of the town has to pass an ordinance after a public hearing to opt in. That lets the CMDA know that you're serious about it. And then from there, they would focus on helping an area that we would define. They reviewed the town's relevant zoning. They would propose changes that would help increase the number of dwelling units, and they call it the housing growth zone. So there's some steps involved, and if at that point, if they're proposing changes to regulations, those obviously have to be adopted by the town planning and zoning commission. If the commission says no, then you just kind of part ways and that's the end of it. But if you adopt those regulations, then the CMDA can promote development opportunities and they can provide funding after reviewing and approving an application that you might submit. So they say it would likely be provided to fill a gap in project financing, but it could be used for new housing unit construction, demolition, rehabilitation. And then there's some considerations that they look for in terms of these projects. There's at least 10% of it going to be affordable at the 80% AMI level. Would new housing units be provided without an off-street parking requirement? That might be a bit of an issue for Suffield. We don't really have any transit-oriented development or train stations. Not sure if the Windsor Locks train station, if part of that might touch Suffield in terms of transit-oriented development, or if that's even an area that Suffield would be interested in developing. So there's a lot of things to consider. And then the project has to generally promote residential diversity. I take that to mean promoting different housing types, duplexes, triplexes, things of that nature. So that is another option in terms of funding, but there's some steps in order to get some of that funding, and obviously you need a project that would apply for it. So now in terms of the properties that the town owns that might be considered for housing, I did attach a map. The first one, I don't know if it's obvious, it is to me, but the Bridge Street property, it's about 3.4 acres where the former school is located. It's an open property, utilities are available. It's within walking distance to Main Street, connected by sidewalks, Suffield Village next door. Surrounding properties contain multifamily properties already, and the housing authorities across the street. The town owns 3 properties on South Street that we have been marketing for economic development purposes. They are zone light industrial. Nonetheless, there's development potential. They are right across the street from the main runway, but there are utilities available to each property. So there is some possibility there. Betty Lane, if you think of where the water tower is, down by the Windsor Locks line, it's a very small cul-de-sac. Town owns 4 lots there, one of which has the water tower. There are 3 other lots, but only 2, at least based on wetlands and the mapping that I've seen, might be developable. Fairly small lots, but those could be potential building lots for affordable housing. Septic systems would need to be installed. There's no sewer there, so that might limit what you could do, but maybe a house or a duplex or something like that. And that's not a novel idea. I have a file on Betty Lane going back to the 90s where the town was going to sell them, but with the caveat they have to be used for affordable housing. And I don't know who they were talking to, but it never happened, obviously. But that is a possibility. The town owns a lot of other properties that are either residentially zoned or industrial zoned, and the problem is there's just a ton of wetlands, like much of Suffield, or it's open space properties, or they're encumbered by conservation easement. So really, the ones listed here offer the most possibility in terms of the town properties. And then so with regard to the housing authority, they have 70 units of elderly and disabled housing. They have a wait list of 35 people. And when I was talking to Jason, he told me that they reopen the wait list when it gets down to 15, close it again when it gets to 50 people, and they consider that about a 2 to 3 year wait list. So there's certainly demand, I would say. Their experienced people don't generally leave unless their circumstances change or they need to go to another facility for more care or something like that. They would be interested in working with the town on building another phase of housing authority units. if it were for a similar type of housing for elderly and disabled, residents. And so I point that out in this section because there's the senior center next door, there's some land, we'd have to check the wetlands, but there's some land there, and then if you combine it with some of the land that the housing authority currently owns, it's about 1.5 acres, not large, but it could accommodate a couple of buildings for the housing authority. It might be a small, development, but there's some potential there. Also, the property behind the housing authority is privately owned, but it's 24 acres. It fronts on Main Street. I don't know if anyone's ever approached them or asked them, would you be willing to sell some of that property for the housing authority expansion? But that's something that, be worth a letter and a phone call. And then their interest would be in the Bridge Street property as a town-owned property because it's right across the street. Talking to Jason, he wasn't too interested in something that might be down on Betty Lane or South Street, just because of the proximity and where they're located. It would make more sense if it were right across the street. So that's a lot. I don't know if there's any questions on any of that, but with regard to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the recommendations, the other part of this, I did talk to the commission a couple of times in January and March, and the March meeting was more focused, and I prioritized the recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee at that one. And so they do have, there's a general consensus that they would like to take steps to implement those recommendations, or at least get into discussions about it. We also talked a lot about, there was a strong desire from some members that the town should put an RFP out, or request for proposals, for the town-owned lands. If we want to get affordable housing, property that we own, put an RFP out and see what the private development world, comes back with. And that should be done while these recommendations are being considered. So Commission talked a lot about that. I plan to keep going on with the recommendations with them one at a time. I found it difficult to do that at a regular meeting. So it may have to be either special meetings or something. Monday night, for an example, by the time we wrapped up regular business, it was already 9:30, and it just wasn't the time to get into a deep discussion about affordable housing. So we'll have to kind of figure that out. But I'm working on it, and I'll report back as I have more information. So I guess moving forward, the Corvus Capital folks, they had a couple of very good bits of recommendations, rather, I should say. And as far as the town property, if the consideration is to work with a developer, we should know the ins and outs of that property before we do anything. Understand any environmental concerns, utility capacity, just basic development, potentials of the property, up to date, not wetlands delineations from 20 years ago, and that sort of thing. They also, emphasize the point of knowing who you're building for, and they suggested a market study to possibly help with that. That would tell you what the demographics are, the needs of the community, the services that any potential residents would need if they move there. What are the required income levels? It would give you a lot of information so you know who you'd be building for. If the idea is elderly and disabled, similar to the housing authority, not sure you need a market study. I think their wait list is a pretty good indication that there's a need. So that might be something that we wouldn't have to do, but if it's other types of affordable housing, a market study might make sense. So they really kind of push that because you have to know who you're building for. If we put an RFP out, we want affordable housing, okay, great, but what are you talking about? What levels, And when you talk about affordable housing, is there more services that they would need? Can the town accommodate that or not? So some things to consider. Also, they had a lot of questions that the town, should discuss as they're thinking about this. If we're working with a private developer, would we sell property for a reduced price? Would we offer tax abatements? Would we give a break on the cost of building permits? Payment in lieu of taxes is something they mentioned. Again, it all comes down to the financing and the money for these things. If the town's willing to work with them, if they know that for the next 5-10 years they're going to get a portion of their taxes back, that helps with the financing. And that's not uncommon. You see it in the paper with somewhat regularity. I think East Hartford, a couple of other towns, they've had properties that private developers are developing. The town wants to see that happen, either if it's a strip mall or something else that has been vacant for a while. They're giving tax abatements up to 10 years or more to the cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes maybe millions, I'm not sure. But it's not uncommon to see towns work with developers, whereas 15 years ago that would have been, way out of left field. So those were questions from the developer, something for the town to consider if we're going to get into that. And again, the complexity with financing, it's not an easy thing. Understanding the property, and also public opinion, that's a big one. When you're talking about town property, as we know, to sell a town property, you have to go to a town meeting. I'm not sure who remembers I can't remember when it was, when we had a developer that was interested in the Bridge Street parcel. That was when the school building was there. And they wanted to build market rate apartments, and we had a town meeting. And I think it was at least 500 people, and it went down spectacularly. We heard everything from, well, that's going to be affordable housing, to the school is there, and there's sentimental value with that. We don't want to see that change. No developer is going to want to spend tens of thousands of dollars putting together concept plans, doing some due diligence, getting to a town meeting and having it go down in flames. That may be unavoidable, but if the town is considering town property for housing, especially affordable housing, even housing authority type properties, it may be worth doing some groundwork on public opinion. So again, housing authority, they would be interested if it's similar to what they're doing. When it gets to families in housing authorities, they're not really equipped to handle the services and the needs that families might need. For them, elderly and disabled housing is preferred. But if the town is interested in some of these town properties for housing authority expansion, then we should be working hand in hand with the housing authority from day one, so that they're involved with every part of it, because they're going to be the ones that would run it. So then, after that, you can figure out what funding sources might be available. Do we put it out on an RFP? Who are we going to work with? All of that can kind of fall in line. But if the town's going to use town property, obviously that's a big discussion, and there's a lot of steps involved. I think that kind of summarizes. I may have missed something in there, but and just, this might be helpful to sort of put into context. A one-bedroom rental at 50% AMI is about $992 a month. I was mentioning some things about 50% AMI. A one-bedroom rental at 80% AMI is $1,458 a month. A three-bedroom at 80% for sale, and that assumed a 5% interest rate. It's going to be higher these days. It was about $280,000. A four-bedroom for sale unit would be about $308 at 80% AMI. Probably a little less now with the interest rates, but throw in 80%, 50% AMI, 120% doesn't mean much if it has some kind of context. But anyhow, that's a lot of talking. I know. I wasn't expecting decisions. Obviously, this is just information purposes and reporting back. Hopefully, I hit the mark. If I missed something, or if you want me to investigate something further, please let me know. I know it took a while to get here. It's been since December, but
I wouldn't say that it's taken some time. You've had to do a lot of work to gather all this information and pull it together for us, and you've been doing a lot of work with P&Z and everything else that you do. I log on to those meetings, so
I know.
I see what you do. So thank you for this. I think it gives us a great start. I personally would like just maybe till our next meeting to kind of give it a little bit more thought.
Yeah.
But I think it gives us a good action plan, especially understanding that we really need to know what it is we're looking for, and then do our due diligence before we kind of go up either with an RFP or try and decide if we do want to work with. I personally don't think the town should be like the developer. I just think that's extra duties and who's gonna do it and who has the experience for that. So, I mean, I think an RFP is probably the way to go. I also think, like you said, we already know we have a need in town for elderly and disabled housing. So maybe we don't need so much of a market study, but maybe we need somewhat of a market study so that we know what type of services they might need. Is our town able to provide that with additional housing units? And then making sure that whatever properties we do pick, because what I'm hearing from you is the housing authority wants to make sure the land that we will use would be nearby them, nearby their current property,
Yeah.
preferably. So to know about wetlands and any other concerns and capacity and things like that, try to get that all lined up.
I echo your comments, I agree.
Was that?
I echo your comments, I agree with your thought process there.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any?
Yeah, I went back through my notes, and I just saw that according to the state, we're short 231 units of affordable housing.
Yep.
So my question is, I'm thinking about that parcel that's privately owned behind it, but how large is the parcel with the 70 units that we currently have? How large is that?
That's a good question. I
It's
think
a
in
thousand
total,
foot, yeah.
it's not more than 5 or 6 acres.
Okay.
It's just under, like, 5, I think,
Yeah.
combined.
Yeah, I thought it was 4 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it's
It's
5.
not
Okay,
very
all
large.
right.
It's a dense
Yeah,
development.
For sure is. So I'm thinking, maybe we could talk to that landowner, because if
It's
you
worth a
connect all of
question.
that together, maybe they could cut up course. I'm just throwing ideas out. I obviously, we're at the beginning stages, but I think that would give synergy to that whole area, and it's also close to the center of town, and everything that they would need is kind of walking distance across the street there for the most part.
Makes a lot of sense. And like I say, it's worth a letter or a phone call.
Yep.
And all they can say is say no.
Do we know what the condition of the land is behind there?
There, according to the GIS, it looks like there are some wetlands, but there's a fair amount of dry area. But that would have to be investigated if there
Right.
was interest. Yeah.
But if you got say 4.5 to 5 acres now
Mhm.
that we've used, and there's 20, I think you said 29 acres?
24 acres.
24 acres, even if you took half of that,
Yep.
you know,
Yeah, there's potential there, yeah, for sure.
there's no, I mean, since I've lived in town, there's always been a waiting list to get in there. I mean, it's not new. So there's clearly a demand for that population.
And I say this with the townland because I know there's other ideas for these properties as well. The Bridge Street property, I don't know, there was the park idea, I don't know where that stands. I think the Economic Development Commission is currently throwing some ideas around for housing, market rate housing and a park and some other things. So I don't know, where all that lines up. And then, of course, South Street, we're offering them for economic development purposes.
One other advantage of the housing authority is that population does not put any kids in the schools.
Just one other sort of food for thought, if, particularly as you consider things like an RFP. There are as many options with respect to how property is dealt with as there are financing. And other housing authorities, other towns will do things like lease the property on a 100-year land lease to a developer and then not sort of give up the property for future generations. That then creates finance implications as well, because they can't go to, necessarily to a commercial bank or your everyday commercial bank in order to get financing on a property like that. So I just throw that out there, that how the property is dealt with, complicates the financing, and is probably something that needs to be thought about in depth before any sort of RFP can be issued for any particular property.
That's a good point.
Have anything you want to comment on?
Just
Yeah,
one
just,
other thought. One other thought on the housing authority. Right now, they're single floor.
Yep.
There's nothing to say in the back we couldn't put like a 3-story
Yep.
structure there, which would increase.
Absolutely, yeah, you could, multi-story is certainly an option.
Yeah.
Condenses your building footprint.
Fully clear.
Yeah, Bill, I just want to thank you for putting this together. I know the funding sources was really helpful for me. I didn't have much background on that, so that was really helpful. I did pull up the property at 78 South Main Street. It looks like you said, there are some wetlands on there. There may be an opportunity for a couple acres, so maybe the multi-story is a potential option. I just want to thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Just want to say I really like the housing authority expansion idea. Like, give that more consideration for the next meeting.
Yeah.
If you guys will give that more consideration.
Yeah.
So we can actually start exploring something beyond discussion.
Yeah, we're finishing up the grant project with them now, and I think they're in a really good place after that as far as capital needs. So the timing might be right to have this discussion. It was a $2 million project, and I think they did some siding too. So they're in a really good spot as far as the condition of that property. So they may have some capacity, because that takes up a lot of their bandwidth when they have a project like this going on.
When you talk to the gentleman you mentioned who knows the housing,
Yep.
funding for housing, was there any particular population that seems to be more attractive to get funding for?
We didn't really talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just the nuts and bolts of the funding sources.
The other thing, just to point out, the housing authority, kind of like the WPCA, can bond, but sort of runs those bonds through the town, but it's on its own financial line item, so it doesn't hurt the town's bonding capacity if a project's bonded through the WPCA or through the housing authority. So just kind of food for thought from the economics of it as well.
All right, we'll circle back to this next
Yep.
meeting. Appreciate your update.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
Thank you,
For
Bill.
You're welcome.
Amazing as always.
Need anything else?
Well,
Amanda?
All right, thank you. Have a great night.
Good job, Bill.
Item number 9 is discussion and approval to transfer funds from the Sunrise Park split rail fence to new account Sunrise Park water tank and pump replacement, and refer to the Board of Finance. You guys received the memo from Director of Public Works, Lee Corbett, who's with us here tonight. If you have any questions, essentially he has some leftover money from building the fence, and he would like to use that to replace, I believe, a water heater, water tank, and a pump. So, if you want to join us, any questions you guys have, if you need to explain it further than that, or you can go from there.
So every year, up at Sunrise Park, we have to have the, well turned on for the season. Obviously, we haven't shut down, everything blown out for the winter. So they came this spring, when I was setting up the appointment, the park superintendent, Tom O'Brien, let me know that his water was really poorly flowing in the house, and he believed there to be an issue. So at the same time that I had Aqua Pump out there to open up everything for the year at the park, I had them go check out the house. They ended up finding out that the existing tank and the pump were failing. The expected lifespan on those was 20 years. We're now in year 30 up there. So I asked them to give me a quote as to what would need to be done to repair the system and get it back up and running. I believe you all have a copy of that quote in front of you. So we had capital money for doing a fence project up at Sunrise Park of $6,500. I ended up having the highwaymen do the job in-house, and we saved total of $4,771 by doing it in-house. So I'm asking to use that money to fund the project to fix the well and the pump at the superintendent's house at Sunrise Park.
Great. Thanks. Anyone have any questions, Bill?
Did we get any other quotes besides Aqua Pump?
No, because they were already going up there, so just to see where we are at, for a rough price, they already serviced the area. I asked them just to give me a price because I knew that no matter what, I was gonna have to figure out funding for the project.
Okay.
It's pretty typical for us to just get a quote, and then if we have to follow the bid process, then we go out to purchase.
Yep,
one.
So-
that was gonna be my next question. I kind of assumed that that's what we were gonna do.
With any job under $10,000, it's a decision I can make. Over 10, I get 3 bids, and anything over $20,000 has to go out to an RFP.
I make a motion that we approve the transfer of funds from the Sunrise Park split rail fence to new account Sunrise Park water tank and pump replacement and refer to the Board of Finance.
All right, the motion has been made. Is there
Do
any
you
further
do you have to
discussion?
put the amount in there?
I mean, it could be as presented in the letter that he has.
And in the motion might be,
So the motion is to transfer, it sounds to me like all of the rest of the funds from the one account to the next, so I don't think I need to put an amount in there.
All right.
And Kathy, are you okay with, Derek doesn't have it in front of him, so I'll just defer to you.
Mhm.
Prices to be within quote, barring any unforeseen complications with installation. You're right with that on there, or should we ask for more definitive language if we,
You're looking at the
Take the
quote,
quote.
and let me see.
or not
So
to
the quote
exceed?
says, prices to be within quote barring any unforeseen complications with the installations.
So
I mean,
just to
I'm
give you a
fine.
background on that,
Yeah.
anytime I get a quote like this, if we're gonna move forward, I always put in my response and signing off that it's to not exceed without prior permission.
Okay.
So should they go up there and find an issue, they would have to report it to me. I would go up there, figure out what's going on with it, get an explanation of why whatever's going on is going on, and then make a decision from there. It's like that on every job we do.
okay.
So if they encounter a problem with the installation, they would stop, talk to you?
They have to stop and talk to me and explain what the extra charges would be, why, what's going on is going on, so I
Okay.
can get a full background before we.
And I would say Lee's incredibly on top of this.
Yeah,
As far as-
that's all I'm worried about is that
Yeah.
they go, oh, well, I don't know what they're gonna do.
Yeah, not with.
Dig a new trench, that's
Not-
$5,000.
Me doing that.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I am comfortable with it.
Okay,
Based
Right.
on his representation.
Yep.
Mhm.
Is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none, call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate your time
Great
tonight.
thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
All right, item number 10 is discussion and approval to accept the transfer of cemetery property on Mountain Road, owned by West Suffield Cemetery Association, and referred to the Board of Finance. If you guys recall, we had this discussion fairly recently
Yep.
about the cemetery. We did receive a letter from the association requesting that we take ownership, and I have the town attorney, Derek Donnelly, with us to discuss this further and the next steps and what we really need to do here, Derek.
Sure, thank you. So again, you'll recall, we discussed this previously, the West Jesus, West Suffield Cemetery Association, right on Mountain Road here, has a aging board. It does not have a succession plan for how they're going to deal with the management of the cemetery in the future. They approached the town through the first selectman probably about 6 months ago and started these discussions about turning it over. Once again, if they were simply to abandon the cemetery, it would be the town's responsibility under the statute. We'd have to go through a lengthy notice process in order to do so. After some discussions, they thought it would be best if they just turned over the cemetery to the town. I think the one thing that has come to light since we last spoke is that when they told us that they had significant funds in order to care for the cemetery for the future. We hear that a fair amount. We perhaps weren't as optimistic about the numbers as they turned out to be, which is why we were going to have to refer them to the Board of Finance. They have $146,000, majority of which is in a perpetual care fund, sort of a trust that functions for the cemetery that the town would take over. We do manage a few other perpetual care funds for other cemeteries as well. So this has been, and I will, there's some very good, dedicated people who have worked on this, the ORs, the board members, Rich Romano, Tom Belmore, who put a lot of effort into managing this well for a very long time, and they certainly have. With that, the town would, as we discussed before, take over the management of the cemetery. They retain sort of a private service that manages the day-to-day operations of the cemetery. We'd have, including opening graves, selling plots, all of those sorts of things. The town would enter a contract to continue that service, right? So this would not be an additional added expense onto the town. The funds would transfer to the finance department through the Board of Finance and be managed with the other cemetery funds. The perpetual care fund, which is in and of itself more than $100,000, would be set aside in order to continue to care for the cemetery in the future, be reinvested in order to provide for the cemetery in the future. So this comes to us as I think, an extremely well-run organization and a very good opportunity to take care of a very important resource in history of the town. So feel pretty good about where we are on this. Their board met on the 8th of May and voted to affirmatively approve this to the town, this transfer to the town. We would have to then, the Board of Selectmen have to vote in favor of it, refer to the Board of Finance because of the financial implications. The Board of Finance would have to accept this and refer it to the town meeting, call a town meeting in the future, and this would have to be approved at town meeting. So this is step probably 2 in that process, now that we have the formal letter.
Is it possible, not that it's our decision, to move those funds into our perpetual care account that we already have?
I believe I'll talk to Mandy about it, but I believe their perpetual care funds need to remain segregated to care for their perpetual care. Their, the other accounts that they have is just a checking and savings account at People's Bank, and those funds, I would anticipate would be moved into the other cemetery fund, the collective cemetery funds that go to, for things like mowing and maintenance and things of that nature.
Okay. So does anyone have any other questions for Derek besides what
Are there
we
many
discussed before?
lots still available?
There are, yes, I think they said they're about 70% full, so there's quite a bit of additional
Who
revenue.
determines the cost for those?
I would assume I can't remember the name of the sexton?
Yeah.
Sexton?
I know it was,
Sexton, that's what you
Yeah.
wrote, yeah.
I believe,
Kentucky
I
Blue.
would assume that they set them up to rate for
Kentucky
them,
Blue.
but that would have to be something that we'd discuss. We'd obviously want those consistent with the other cemeteries that we have to manage, so.
And that was part of my question. So just kind of walk me through this. So we take over the cemetery, but basically the people that are running it are still going to continue to run it, right? But, so if someone passes away and a family comes in and says, I want to, or a funeral home says, we want to buy a plot, how does all of that money work? Do they pay Kentucky Blue and Kentucky Blue pays us, or do we get a check? Does the town get a check?
Yeah, I believe the town would get a check into the cemetery perpetual care fund. The contract with Kentucky Blue, we continue that contract, town keeps paying it. The deed for the plot actually gets recorded at town hall, like all the other deeds in the cemetery. It's been pretty well documented. And all of that money never hits the general fund. It goes directly into the cemetery care fund in order to continue to care for that particular cemetery.
So what about the cost of digging the grave? Is that included in it's a contracted price, or is it?
It's like on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
The funeral home will collect for it and then pay it to Kentucky Blue.
Okay.
Who will actually open the grave.
Okay, that's even better.
Yeah, it doesn't touch us at all.
Okay, good.
Any other questions?
And the people who are overseeing it now want to continue on overseeing?
Yes.
I thought they wanted to get out because they're,
No, I'm sorry. So there's two different things. The board members, they're down to their last 3 board members. They are walking away. But the service Kentucky Blue that sort of operates the day-to-day of the cemetery will continue to do so.
but who do they report to?
No, that was the.
Yeah, they would then report to the town, and typically that's been run by finance, but this board may want to consider whether there's someone who's specifically designated to be the point person.
So is this a bluegrass company?
I don't know where they came up with the name, so.
Kentucky Bluegrass?
You'll have to ask them now. Any other questions, concerns, comments? Then I would entertain a motion.
Kathy Harrington, I'll move the approval we approve and accept the transfer of cemetery property on Mountain Road owned by West Suffield Cemetery Association and refer to the Board of Finance.
All right, the motion has been made. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Derek, thanks for all your work. on
Thanks,
this.
Derek.
Appreciate
No
it.
problem.
All right, item number 11 is discussion of facilities master plan and consulting RFP. So I do have Chairman of PBC Kevin Goff here with us tonight. At our last meeting, we discussed possibly getting a consulting group from the beginning of this, to start with us at the beginning of this project and process. Kevin went out, asked a group to create the RFP for us. I sent that to you guys. I sent it to our town attorney for review. And given that none of us here are really too experienced with RFPs and in this line of work, I think it would be more appropriate to hand it over to Kevin and his commission and say, can you work on the RFP and get it out there in the next few weeks? So what are everyone's thoughts there? And Kevin, feel free to join us or chime in with your thoughts on the RFP. I know there's some work you and I discussed on that needs to be added and discussed with the group.
I would say that we should classify what we have right now as a draft RFP.
Yep.
And we've already made some comments together as a group and some individuals. We're still trying to wrestle with exactly what we're asking our consultants to do. Are we asking them to tackle all 11 buildings? Or are we gonna narrow it down to the most in need? There's a lot of moving parts, but we're in discussions with a consultant who is helping us formulate the RFP. And then we have a list of consultants that we'll be contacting to get a variety of approaches to how do we do this. You know, if we had an unlimited amount of money, we would just hire somebody to do it all. But I don't think that's gonna be the case. So we're gonna have to prioritize what we tackle first with the funds that the town is willing to put forward for that. We know what the two major issues are, and that's where we would like to start. It is really gonna depend on some, just a whole lot of variables that could come into play.
And I think that's where we do start with the middle school and firehouse headquarters as discussed
Right.
last meeting, that we all kind of came to a consensus. That's where we
Right.
think the major issue is.
Right.
And then tackle the other stuff in the very near future.
Right.
So I think we want to get these projects going. We
But
wanna
we've
see
got
what
to
the
start
cost is.
someplace, and
Yeah.
those two buildings are really the most in need, so that seems to be where the bulk of the focus will be.
How long do you think it would take us to get that out there once we have to relook at what we think we
We're
need
gonna meet
added?
tomorrow night, and that's gonna be the PBC will meet tomorrow night. We will discuss that RFP to get some good group discussion going on how to formulate that. PBC already has the draft copy for review before our meeting. So I would anticipate by the end of tomorrow night's meeting, we'll get more comments. We'll be able to formulate that in the next 2 weeks to be street ready. In 2 more weeks, if we are that close, we'll have another special meeting of the PBC, and we'll finalize everything that has come to us and what we know. And then we can get that out. Now, I would say that we would get that out with a 3 to 4 week lead time for people to absorb what we're asking for, give time for questions, RFIs. You know, that puts us at the end of June, so that we could actually get this out to look at RFP proposals sometime in July. That's really aggressive. I don't know how realistic it is, but that's what we would be shooting for.
Do you need a more definitive answer from us as to tell the PBC, focus on the middle school and firehouse headquarters on this?
No, I think we know that.
Okay.
I do think that we know that that's where we have to go. There will be some implications based on what we get back from the consultants on whether or not we keep all the students in the places that they are right now, and that will dictate some of the reimbursement rates, and that may dictate, you know, which way we go, whether it's renovate or build new, and where, and all of that. That's what we need the consultants to help us with. They're really the ones that are gonna give us the most information, detailed information that we don't have. So we will definitely be starting middle school firehouse, and then figure out, you know, it might be easier and quicker to get a firehouse project ready to go. Whereas dealing with the state and the regulations and the school departments, it may take an extra period of time that we can get this one going while we're still working to get the school going.
So kind of along those same lines, I know the way that the draft is, it just says Suffield Middle School, and it doesn't mention the Firehouse One or any of the other buildings. I know we're trying to keep it maybe more narrow for consultants like them to give us bids. But is it possible to like identify 2 buildings and then say, you know, these are the main focus, but we may have the consultant look at, they may need to look at other buildings in the town as a comprehensive, or how they impact? Is
Yeah,
there a possible way to build in that language?
That's entirely appropriate.
Okay.
So, I have a few edits that are more legal in nature. I don't really get into the
Yep.
context of it. I can hold off until you guys meet tomorrow and then send those over, or?
That would be great.
Yeah, because I don't want to complicate drafts going around.
Right. If you would let me know your thoughts?
Yeah,
That would be helpful.
Okay, I'll send it over in the morning. I have it at the office.
Thanks.
But yeah, Kathy, that's completely appropriate.
Okay, good.
Kevin and I did meet off topic a little, but still facilities with the Board of Education, the superintendent, and the business manager this morning, just to kind of let them know, hey, we need you guys to come up with a presentation on the programmatic needs of a middle school. So we as a board can see it. I know we had a meeting a year and a half ago. I'm not sure what your feelings were about that, but I think a stronger case, and I've heard you, Mel, say that maybe a stronger case would be helpful for that cause, so.
Particularly to sell it to the community.
Yeah, that's what our discussion was this morning.
Right.
Yeah, we made that pretty clear.
I had similar questions to Kathy, because it only said middle school, and I thought when you were here, you talked about middle school and the firehouse.
Right.
So, my questions is, if I understood you correct when you presented, in order to get funding at a more agreeable level for the town, you probably have to move some students, whether it's the 5th grade into the middle school or the 9th grade into the middle school.
That's if we renovate. So if we renovate, we're kind of stuck with the square footage that we have.
Right.
If we build new,
Right.
we would develop a program in a school for
Right.
the right amount of students.
But my point is, if you build new, it sounds like financially, to get it at a cost that might be agreeable to the town, we gotta move one class, one grade level, up or down, either way.
No.
No?
Let me clarify. No, because right now we have 450 students,
Right.
give or take a couple, in the middle school. But we have way more square footage allocated to that 450 than the state will reimburse for. So we get a reimbursement penalty based on the ratio of allowable square feet to the number of students. If we build new, we take 450 students, we multiply it times 179 square feet, and that's the building we design. So we maximize the reimbursement for new. However, we end up with a smaller building for future expansion.
But my point is, if you move another grade into it,
You can build a
you
bigger
can build
building.
a bigger building
Correct.
and get reimbursement,
Right.
so that, which has an impact on wherever you take that grade level from.
Right, and yeah, because if you take a grade level away from McAllister,
Or the
now
high
you're left
school.
with too few kids in
Right.
a big building.
Though you could do the high school too, and bring the 9th grade down.
Good. That kind of messes up
Yeah.
athletics
Yeah.
and everything else. Yeah, but that's all Board of Ed
Yeah.
kind of conversation, and we did touch on that with them this morning to get them thinking along those lines of, you know, what are you willing, we really want the Board of Ed to tell us what their program needs to be, how the existing building affects them, how a new building will affect them, and how renovating the existing building is gonna affect them. That's their task to get back to us.
We wanted a more convincing argument from them.
I'm
We
sorry.
wanted a more convincing argument from them. I think we all agree,
Yeah,
that's what we want.
we said that last
Yeah.
time.
It's really no different than the fire station. If you're not intimately involved in what they're doing, when you drive by, it looks fine.
Right,
When a fire alarm rings and the truck goes down the road, it looks fine.
right. Until you walk
And if
downstairs.
that's all you know, and then you see,
Yeah.
you know, a hit on your tax bill, and you say, why do we need this? I'm not gonna support it. That's the story both groups have to tell.
Agreed. By the way, thank you for bringing up I never thought of it, but I think the idea of, I think you do the firehouse first, because it's a firehouse. It's not as in-depth as a school, and you could, you know, you can talk to the fire chief and the fire department, the fire commission, they can give you some ideas. There might be 30 different ideas, but with the school, there'll be 300. There'll be, you know, I could even gather to come up with the ideas that they would need. And I think it's just an easier project, and you could probably button that up in a year, whereas the school is gonna take planning, and you're gonna have to sell it, because it's gonna be much more expensive than the firehouse. Now, I think obviously we need both of them, but I think the firehouse is the easier one to tackle.
It's probably
You can
the
get
one we
started.
can get to a start date
Yeah.
quicker.
Yeah.
It's very complicated working through the state
The one that drawbacks though is the longer you delay in the school.
I'm not saying delay.
No,
Yeah.
I'm
saying
just
it's
saying
gonna
though,
take longer.
if it slows it down, it just gets more costly.
Yeah.
And the
So
school
from the
will dramatically
PBC's
raise-
perspective, we're not doing one project and then starting another. We're working on both, but this one's gonna get to the start
No,
quicker.
let's just hire people who can handle all the day-to-day stuff. That's what we haven't done.
Well, that's what we're trying to get to.
That's what we're gonna get to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely agree with handing it over, allowing them to do their work, work with the town attorney, work with PDC. I think, thank you. I agree.
Do you need a day-to-day liaison, like Lee, to work with you guys on
Yeah,
this?
we're definitely gonna need somebody to handle the transactional type of things. And we will probably need him attending our meetings on a regular basis to stay up with, because things are happening quickly. No different than the project at the high school right now with the rooftop units. Every day there's new information that comes up.
I'll make sure that happens.
Great.
Anyone else have anything for Kevin?
No, so
No, nice job.
regarding the RFP, can they do it on their own, or does it have to be approved by us first?
I mean, you could send it for us to review if you guys have anything final
No,
comments.
I was gonna suggest, if it doesn't have to be, if there's no ruling or anything, I would suggest just have the town attorney approve it, and
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
I feel like if Derek wants us to look at it for some reason, I'm happy to look at it, but I'm happy to just have Derek.
You know, what I mean, I wanna keep
No, I know
things
you-
moving.
the approval
Exactly.
process,
I don't
yeah,
wanna
yeah.
stop it, I wanna
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
things going.
I agree. I'd rather it keep moving.
I mean, I think right now we're charging them to do that, so it's.
Yep.
Okay,
So
good.
I think in terms of our ability to keep moving, let us get the RFP out, and
Yeah.
Derek's input
Yeah.
will be very valuable.
I think so.
When it comes time to make a decision to hire somebody,
Yeah.
then you
You
guys,
show us your recommendations,
Right.
right, and then we decide.
Yeah.
from there. Yeah.
but let us move.
Yep.
Awesome. All right.
Especially if we want to keep this
Keep it going.
alive.
We do, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a lot of moving parts to this. Okay,
Keep it moving.
yeah.
Okay, good.
Anyone else?
Nope.
Kevin, anything else?
That's it.
Appreciate your time and your work
Yep.
on this.
Thank you.
welcome.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
coming tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, moving on to item 12, public comment. Is there any public comment in the room? Seeing none, is there any public comment on Zoom? Any public comment on Zoom? I think that's a
Is that a
meeting.
hand?
No, it's a microphone.
Yeah, it's a microphone.
All right. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Kevin Goff, 475 Thompsonville Road. I'm going to speak just as a citizen. I'm really happy to hear the affordable housing conversation is still alive. And I think to pick a starting point that is manageable and with the recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee to at least consider the town-owned land for a starting point. And the housing authority is great progress. Just to tie it together with what we're talking about with school population, we need more kids. We need more young people in town. The school population right now seems to be settling at a point, but housing is really getting expensive. Young families with kids are waiting longer and longer to come into town. The finances just kind of require it. So it's going to be really important that we consider the town's future, and bringing in some affordable housing is going to be helpful. The affordable housing for seniors is not going to help us in that regard, but it may help up if we can move a senior into the housing authority and open up an existing home to somebody else. So that's
more affordable housing.
right. So that's where I see. Thank you for keeping it going.
Thanks, Dan. All right, one more time, any public comment? All right. Seeing none, item number 13 is selectmen updates. Just a reminder that the Memorial Day service is this Monday, and the parade has been moved, starting at Kent Ave, going up South Main, 9:15. I attended our 3 new fire department cadets graduation this afternoon, so welcome to them. They'll be starting very soon. And the Dustin Doyon Road Race is this weekend, so Kathy, Claire, and I will be, are we walking the 5K?
We're walking it.
Okay, good.
Fast walk.
Yeah.
Fast walk,
I'll push you.
let's determine that once we get on Hill
We may have to
Street.
carry you
Yeah.
in the last mile.
It's okay.
Yeah. I did reach a tentative agreement with the police union on their upcoming expiring contract, so we're waiting for them to approve, and I'll get over all the details to you guys. Planning for a town meeting for the end of June, so we're still waiting to get through the solar approvals through planning, zoning, conservation, which we expect no later than mid-June to be completed. And we need to wait for the cemetery to go to Board of Finance, so that's gonna be early June. And then I just wanted to recognize the work of some of our volunteers who I've been working with a lot lately. Robin Zatoni has been with her on a bunch of projects, so thank you to her. Dana Gontner, thank you to her. Kevin Goff, see a lot of Kevin, so thank you, Kevin. Not a bad thing. And Glenn Nielsen, so thanks to him also. And anyone have anything they'd like to share? All right, well then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Saturday.
Saturday
Oh,
morning.
I'm sorry, Saturday.
I feel like the end of May